So I would like to introduce Mary Case from University Librarian, University of Illinois at Chicago, and also a member of the development team, the working group that planned this conference. Ingrid, University Librarian at the University of British Columbia and former Assistant Deputy Minister of Library and Archives Canada, also a member of the team that's organized this forum, and Brent Rowe, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. So, welcome to the Leviathan Forum. You guys are organized, right?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mary Case from University of Illinois at Chicago, and I have found the last day and a half very interesting, very overwhelming. And I just wanted to take just a few minutes to, each of us will take about the 10 minutes, and then it'll be open to hear your good ideas about how we solve all these problems. Just take a few minutes to muse on a couple of things that came up over the course of the conversations in the last couple of days for me, and then to just speculate on just a few things that research libraries might be able to do in this particular environment. So I want to talk a little bit about one of the first things that occurred to me yesterday was around values and audience and use and who gets to determine the value of the information at hand. So we're really talking about the tension, I think, that's very familiar to us in many ways between a government who has work to do, has records to maintain, has a history to maintain, has public laws to maintain, accountability and transparency on the one hand, and risk management for privacy and security. And you have scholars on the other who would like to see everything has potential value. And we had these conversations about 20 years ago in the analog world when those who were interested in the history of the book and wanting to preserve every single copy, every single version of the book. And again, on the other hand, the practicality for us to be able to actually manage and deal with these kinds of things. So I think we're always going to see that tension between the desire of the scholar and others really to be able to have everything available to them and, you know, the not opposite, but the other view in terms of just how do we manage all of this information with the laws and regulations that in fact govern it. And again, how do we manage the risk management? Technology may actually end up helping. And while I think Tom was being slightly ironic in his suggestion about the NSA, I actually was intrigued by that. It seems to me to suggest that technologies do exist and are available to track metadata. If you can track metadata on every single phone call, and you can timestamp it, and you can collect who the calling to and the numbers are, you can track versions. There's no problem there. That there are digital forensics tools that can actually help you with whether or not you have the authentic document or it's been tinkered with. But there are ways to categorize and computize over vast quantities of information that can help you tag the things that might be sensitive and might need more review. So the technology is there, but why the NSA and not the ERA? I was not totally familiar with the ERA, so forgive me if I go askew here. But there was some suggestion yesterday that money was not the issue, that it was maybe the B team from the company, from the contractor. But I want to ask, are we asking for the right system? Are we asking for the dark archive, the document manager, or are we asking for that active database where we are constantly collecting, constantly searching, constantly pinging? So you've got the difference between the business model built on access that I think Paul Wagner talked about yesterday versus the business model based on, oh, we're just going to save it over time just because somebody might someday have to use it. So those are very different, it seems to me, systems in terms of mindsets and development and design that may have something to do with why and where we are. I don't also want to be naive. You know, it's expensive to build this technology, to use this technology, even if NARA could be the ongoing backup and already have all of that information, be able to migrate it over time. As has been stated here many times, we wouldn't want them to be the only ones. So there would need to be some kind of replication somewhere else, and again, within the community, at least within the academic community, the digital preservation network is beginning to evolve, could be possibly a node and a piece of that larger infrastructure that we may be talking about. All of this also made me speculate on what's going on locally. So we're a public institution. We're required by a Public Freedom of Information Act to have records and have records processes. And some campuses have had long histories of doing it better than our local campus did. And nobody had started dealing with the digital yet. So a couple of years ago, because of change in FOIA law, that made the turnaround time to request shorter, put on some financial penalties if you didn't respond, there was an increased interest on the part of the administration to actually get a program that was university-wide up and running. So there was an opportunity to meet with the chancellors and vice chancellors and deans and suggest to them that their email had been identified as records of enduring value, and that it would all be subject to being swept at some point. So let me tell you the reactions in that room. First, horror. Think of all that stuff in your email you would never want anyone to see, including all the personal emails. Then disbelief. How in the hell are you going to do that? How can we possibly afford that? What technology? What cost? Is this a priority really in this institution? How are you going to ensure privacy and make sure that nobody gets access to something that they shouldn't? Anger. You cannot ask me to do one more thing related to my email. I cannot manage it now. So if I have to physically do something to make this happen, forget about it. Puzzlement. Who the heck would ever care? Why does anyone want to see these documents? And actually, after about 3 meetings, there's a growing acceptance and a beginning to understand kind of what the point is, but a real expression of need for guidelines. You got to tell me what you need me to do, or what you're going to do to make it happen without me. So I think one of the important things to keep in mind in all of this, and I think it's been suggested, if maybe not explicitly said, but we've lost in the last 25 years that connection between records managers and right now the creators and custodians. So we're the creators and we're now the custodians. Well, every email, every document, it used to be it went to the secretary. It was that printed, went to the files, somebody at the end of the year took care of them, sent them off to whatever office they needed to be. We didn't have to think about it. It wasn't in our minds, wasn't a part of what we did, it wasn't a part of our culture or understanding. So we're having to start from ground zero in many ways and re-educating people, or educating them to begin with, in terms of what the importance of those documents are, not only to the history of the institution, but to our memory, our records, our ability to actually go forward in doing our business. So I think those are important things to remember, and I think it was also a lesson for the records managers. But this is a different world, and the people we're working with don't necessarily have that mind frame going into this. So this is a very small microcosm of what we've been talking about. And if we talk about government records, we are public institutions, many of us. We live in cities who have records that were being lost by the thousands, millions, our counties, our regions, our states, before we even get to the federal. And I'm already overwhelmed. So how can we think about levels of responsibility, or where we can plug into these various venues and help to find the right scale, the right place, the right role for us at the right time? Another issue that Bernie alluded to, there is that porous line anymore between what's a record, what's a document, what's data, what's a website, what's social media. It's all data. It's all become data. And it's all become a push to ensure that it's in some fashion where it can be mashed up, it can be used, it can be GIS'd, it can be taken apart and out of the context in some way and recontextualized. So I think those are things to keep in mind as well. But the other interesting thing is when we talk data, and we're all learning about data management and research libraries and what role we can play, we're being encouraged to get closer and closer to that point where that data is being created in the first place. And so moving back upstream has been alluded to a couple of times, and I think that's going to be critical to us, or to the government, or to the agencies, in terms of really understanding you have to create it with preservation, or at least long-term use in mind to begin with. One other comment from James earlier today, in thinking about the Centers of Excellence approach to government documents, takes me back to my government documents course in library school, where the notion of actually integrating documents into the collections instead of thinking about them as a whole separate entity might actually be something that we should be thinking about in this context. And it made me think about the major NSF-funded projects at the moment, the DataNet project. So Data One is out there collecting environmental data. I would assume, I would hope that large portions of what they have is government data. And they have preservation plans for these. So how is there a way to grow that model that might help in a lot of this in bringing the government information that's related to and engaged in the context and subjects and disciplinary worlds in which we're a little bit more used to, might help to address some of these problems so we're not trying to replicate them all on our own. One last point before going into some suggestions. It seems to me we're trying to address a new problem of the born digital going forward with an anachronistic model. I don't think we can fix what's there. I think, whether or not the government's ready for a new agency or a new world, I think we have to think outside the FDLP. We have to find another way of dealing with electronic that doesn't engage that, doesn't involve that. It made me think about the CATs and even the print environment that we theoretically don't own. What if we didn't acquire the print under the FDLP? What if we went out and just bought the stuff that was relevant to our local communities? We talk about that in the open access environment. We're not necessarily going out bringing that in locally when it's relevant. Maybe this is something similar, but again, we can't all do it, so we need to find ways to do it a little bit more together. So what can research libraries do? Just very briefly, we need to tell the story better. We need to explain, even in our own communities, why hanging on to this information, why data for the long term, any kind of data, campus data, government data, is critical for our understanding of our present and our future. We need to, as Scott alluded to earlier, leverage our local regional consortia. How can they play a role potentially in some of these issues? Can we model and do some pilots with our local governments, with our city, with our region, with our province, with our state, to try to see how we might be able to manage some of this more locally? Working with our own local researchers, public policy agencies who actually are using and trying to deal with this data. And again, I think we need to urge more movement of upstream. So encourage GPO, encourage NARA, whether or not they think they have the mandate to get out there and put out those best practices. Don't wait. Have that community conversation and at least make some attempt to make those known. Easier said than done. Easy for me to say. But also I wanted to found the conversation with ProQuest and having that material saved. Can we figure out how to come to some agreement, perhaps through CRL with ProQuest? Can we have the opportunity to create a trusted digital repository, have some kind of agreement if the company goes out of business, there's some way of getting that content to the community. We can't afford to keep replicating these things. So if somebody's got it and is willing to work with the community to save it, let's figure out a way that we can actually do it. I think that's really all. There's so much. There's been so much in the last day and a half. Many problems to solve, and those are just a few thoughts from one individual. So more to come, and I'm looking forward to hearing much more from you all shortly.
Good afternoon. My head is full too, so I was asked in this little panel to maybe focus a bit more on the Canadian situation. We heard some interesting presentations yesterday, and so this bookends that a little bit to some degree. But inevitably, I'll repeat some of the things that Mary's just said. And I suspect that since we all came to our comments entirely independently, perhaps Ingrid will say some of the things I'll say too, in a more international context. Certainly, we all agree that government information, and I use that term in its broadest sense, should be gathered and preserved, absolutely, and should be made available for use by researchers in and out of government. And we agree that these are things that government should do. But probably we also need to think about, and I would suggest that government information needs to be held independently of government as well. And this came up kind of on the side of a couple of comments during the last 2 days. And I think we need to think about that as, in the area of research libraries, what role do we have to hold government information independently of government? We know that things happen, and if you just think of web content, government web content, well, that changes all the time. There's concern by government for up-to-date information, for there are losses when file formats are changed by government fiat, and when politically embarrassing information is quietly disappeared from a website, and so on. Just to use websites as an example. Cecilia Muir yesterday gave some useful context for the directions that Library and Archives Canada are pursuing in presently. And I'd add a couple that she didn't mention, but which are factors for research libraries in engaging with Canadian government information. There are some standing realities in Canada. One is that at the federal level, collectively at least, we need to work with government information, not just in English, but also in French. So that somewhat, that expands the task. Because some of the same ground has to be covered, in both languages. In Canada as well, we have Crown copyright at the federal level, which is not the case in the U.S. Happily, our term of copyright is still 50 years. That's a good thing. But it is a potential constraint in what the research library community outside of government can do with recent government information. Happily, there is a current policy across the federal government to allow pretty liberal on commercial use of web and even print content now. But that's fragile policy. But it's there. That's good. In Canada, again, a slight difference from the U.S., I think. Our 10 provinces are even more independent fiefdoms and larger, more important governments relative to the federal government than are the individual state governments in general in the U.S. This means that when provincial information, government information is not well preserved, that's a big loss in a lot of domains. And so that's just a reality. Some current developments, also as a bit of context. We have a depository services program as well, of course. And yesterday it was noted that that program has moved to distributing or making available, like really more the case now, government publications in digital form only. That's actually very welcomed by libraries, by research libraries, because they're no longer required to keep the bulk of paper materials that they had to keep before. But with the move to digital government, interestingly, according to the DSP, the capture rate has also increased. It used to be in the paper realm that they were saying, depending on the year, 40 to 70% of what documents produced by various government departments were collected by the DSP. Now they're saying, well, probably getting about 85%. But of course, even the DSP doesn't know what the DSP doesn't know. So, open government, this was also mentioned yesterday. We have an open data portal that the government has set up. When it was, I haven't checked just recently, I know material has been added, data sets have been added. When it was first made available, there was around 100,000 data sets, about 95% of which were meteorological or geological. So there was some complaint that perhaps we needed a little bit more social economic data there. I think that has been improved a bit. But it's an embryonic project. Under open government, there's also a virtual library envisioned to capture all of the publications and other government documents. Again, it's not quite sure what nobody's quite sure what that's going to look like. And an open data government, or open data institute, that was just announced, that would be a university, government, private initiative that the government has given some funding for in the recent budget. But again, it's a little bit vague. We're not really, it's too early to say exactly what that will do. So on the other side from open government, there's also government non-transparency at the political level. And this comes and goes depending on the government. It's the same anywhere. But, in the last couple of years, sometimes as, budget cutting to manage a deficit, sometimes perhaps, some would say for political motives, we've had, government library closures. We've had cuts to Librarian Archives Canada budget, as we heard, National Research Council budget, the elimination of our mandatory long-form census, media muzzling of government scientists, and disappearing Prime Minister's office emails that might be related to a certain Senate scandal, expense reimbursement scandal, and so on. Who knows the whole story on any of these, but nevertheless, another reason that there is a role for organizations outside of government to concern themselves with preservation and availability of government information. Now, as Cecilia mentioned yesterday as well, of course, our National Library and Archives and other government information agencies have a need to find partners. And I can certainly say that LAC is very open to that, which is great. But there are a number of initiatives already underway in Canada that bring together research libraries and government information. Just in 2012, 2013, even more recent, we have a private locks network set up by 11 different university libraries to hold copies of federal government publications and eventually other things. And so the first ingest was the entire e-library of the Depository Services Program, some 100,000 documents. A good start. Digitization. We have a consortium of research libraries. LAC is a member, Librarian Archives Canada, and a number of the university libraries and others. And right now there's a project to digitize some millions of microfilm documents, historical documents held by LAC. Now, the reason why that's important is that the consortium that is doing that is a little bit at arm's length from government, even from libraries, from the university libraries, but it does give the freedom to use business models that might help with cost recovery, which was a little bit controversial when people out there didn't realize that actually this was ultimately the libraries working on this cost recovery. Centralized access to government documents is another thing that is happening. We have an association of parliamentary libraries. APLIC is the acronym. And a couple of years ago, they put together a portal for government documents in electronic form from not just the federal government, but also the various provincial and territorial governments, except for Prince Edward Island and Nunavut to this point. But now they've got about 475,000 items there. Now those are links to government websites or government documents, but nevertheless it brings together a whack of e-publications that would have been awkward to find before in many cases. Enhanced access. For many years now we've had what we call the Data Liberation Initiative, an arrangement between Statistics Canada and the universities to give flat fee access to most Statistics Canada data. And the research data centers funded by our funding councils and Statistics Canada to give researchers access to highly confidential government data, some health data, for example, for their research. And most of these are in about a dozen research libraries across the country. So these are some things that are happening, some things that could happen elsewhere. But I would like to suggest some ideas that out of the discussions in the last couple of days I would see might be interesting. And a couple of points to make before that is that maybe we don't need to keep everything that's produced. Maybe we can't. Maybe the NSA could here in the U.S., apparently. But practically for the rest of us, not going to happen. Is there a way to sample? Is there a way to do chronological slices? I don't know. Maybe you don't need everything, like the national census in Canada and the U.S. It happens once every 5 or 10 years. Maybe a little more often for government web crawl, I'm not sure, but nevertheless. Also, as we heard from the interesting presentations this morning, it may well be very appropriate instead for research libraries just to buy the services of third-party providers. I was extremely impressed and reminded of what they can do that we would have a hard time organizing consortially to do, and consortially is the only way we could do it. So some ideas. Okay, web crawls. We haven't had the happiest experience in Canada of government web crawls to this point. They've happened, but they haven't been made available because it's just been difficult. But is there a way that the research libraries outside of government could help with that? Could they take different domains, different ministries? Could they, again, do it on an interval basis? Crown copyright becomes an issue, but maybe there's a way to work with that. The major research libraries in each province or region could be making an effort to work on their provincial documents. I think some are, but often this is left up to a legislature library, and they have other priorities. Consortially providing trusted digital repository space. Again, this is something that has been slowly developed, or the idea of a TDR has been slowly developing in government. But already, for example, we've got the Ontario Scholars Portal, which is a CLR certified TDR, set up among the Ontario university libraries. Could this be a place to keep an e-records collection? Could Librarian Archives Canada or Librarian Archives Canada, could it change its emphasis from cull and catalog to get from the business value level massive records to the enduring value level smaller massive records, and move to more capture and compute model? And whether it could or not, for its own reasons, would it be possible to take that massive, even not every year, who knows, that massive business value level government information, government records, and if it's going to be discarded anyway at the end of the culling process, well, keep it, but ship it off to a consortium of research libraries for the use of researchers to do data mining and text mining. It's already being looked at for sensitive material that presumably would be removed at the government's discretion. Why not allow that kind of new type of research to be done on this massive material, whereas the enduring value material, well, maybe that's important, and it does help with traditional types of research. Research libraries, as Mary mentioned, are managing often the records management programs of their own universities. Could they develop procedures and best practices that could be shared with government or be applied to government records? Research data centers move from actual survey data to administrative data. This is something that's being talked about in the Canadian context. And there's a wealth of administrative data in health and social services and so on that could be mined in this confidential setting. Now, a national library, and certainly in the Canadian case, can't do everything. Cecilia mentioned that yesterday. In fact, their budget and staffing is probably only a little bit larger than that of the University of Toronto libraries. So it really needs to share its mandate with other research library partners in Canada. Obviously, this has to be with the same level of risk management against loss and security issues as well. Just a couple last points. Research libraries are already getting slowly organized around research data management. This will almost certainly include government data. It has to be if we want to get government money to do it. So that's something that will happen. And then research libraries finally have an advocacy role to play. In a country at least as small, relatively, as Canada, the voice of research libraries do have an influence, and often immediate, sometimes immediate. In our own case, I'm with the Canadian Association of Research Libraries. It's a little bit delicate. We're a registered charity, so we can only say so much and in a certain way. And then, of course, if there are things we want to say to LAC and our National Research Council, who are also members of our members, we want to be discreet about that. But how to find money for new opportunities, for these new activities? That's a big one. And in the Canadian libraries, I think we're coming around to the idea that, well, we just start doing something. If it seems successful, some money will probably be freed up somewhere. But to wait for a fully hatched program to be funded by government, provincially or federally, it's not going to happen in this climate. So start and see what happens. Thank you.
So good afternoon, everyone. And I realize I'm the last invited speaker during this very busy and stimulating 2 days. I will be short in my remarks. It's been a great learning experience for me. I think I came here, actually it's my first CRL meeting, and I never expected to learn so much about what is happening with research libraries, what are the challenges and the issues. And I hope you as well have benefited from the 2 days, and later we'll have some great questions and some good answers. I want to thank Mary and Brent for your overviews and responses to the challenges. They did a lot of the work for me. And it's clear that the situations in the U.S. and in Canada, they present a whole range of common and unique issues. It's pretty clear there's a lot going on, but so much more needs to be done in both jurisdictions. When I worked at Library and Archives Canada several years ago, we used to say that the 90s would be the worst decade in terms of capturing and preserving the output of governments, because that was when the transition to e-government really got rolling, when there was a lot of experimentation and without any coordination or standards, and where a lot of variety of technologies were being used. And as so many of you have pointed out, I don't think we know to any extent what corpus of material is there in terms of digital. What have we already lost? What has been stored? Where has it been stored? And I think that point really came through in the past 2 days. So after hearing all this evidence, I'm not sure that was the worst decade. Maybe we're in the worst decade now. Okay, so Mary and Brent covered the U.S. and Canadian perspectives. So what's left? The world. It's a small task. So I'd just like to take a few minutes to introduce that international aspect to this conversation. I served as IFLA president, IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, from 2011 to 2013. So it seemed appropriate that I would end with sort of this international view. So what then is happening at the international level to ensure the long-term accessibility and integrity of digital government information, including all the types we've heard about? Do they have the answers we are seeking? Well, as far as I'm aware, from what I have seen in my many visits to libraries and archives around the world, not enough is happening. For example, in Europe, the libraries now are focused on copyright exceptions for libraries. They're focused on orphan works, and they're focused on e-lending and the problems with e-lending in our digital world. So digital government information is not top of mind for many libraries in the world. National archives and national libraries in many countries are addressing the challenges, but there is little coordination, and I would say best practices aren't being shared, and we're missing out on sort of that broader positive impact of a concerted approach, and that would be one of my themes here today as well. So the issues we've heard about at the national level also applies to the provincial and the state level, the municipal level. I guess it's not too surprising that when you expand that to the global level, you can see that there is not a concerted global effort yet to deal with what I call that tsunami of born digital government information around the world. I think that's worrisome. I think many countries look to the US and to Canada, to some extent to Australia, the UK as well, for ideas and best practices. So we are being watched to see how we handle digital government information. But it's worrisome because, you know, we are losing that access and accessibility to current generations, but also to future generations of all the researchers we mentioned, but the journalists we heard about, the NGOs and the IGOs, and just members of the global citizenry, the civil society that we talked about. They want to know about the workings of their governments, and not just their own, but other governments around the world. So determining this concerted approach is not going to be simple or quick. And there's many questions about who does what, and how do you carve out on an international level who does what, what's collected, and what's preserved, and who pays for what. I think that's the other issue that has to be debated internationally. I just want to mention one major new project that has started, which I think will help us find some answers to these questions. It's an international collaboration which is called PERSIST, and I'm involved in that. PERSIST, a new acronym, stands for Platform to Enhance the Sustainability of the Information Society Transglobally. Yeah, it just rolls off the tongue, I know. The aim of PERSIST, which is spearheaded by UNESCO, IFLA, and the International Council on Archives, is to enhance the sustainability of the information society by establishing continuity of and access to information. And in doing so, PERSIST seeks to help secure important mechanisms of good governance and the right of access to knowledge and information for all. So government documents and records are definitely part of the scope of this project. Now, the genesis of PERSIST was the UNESCO Memory of the World Conference hosted by UBC in Vancouver in September 2012. And this event focused on permanent access to digital documentary heritage. And in fact, there were hundreds of international delegates at that meeting. There is a subsequent Vancouver Declaration which focuses on the protection of digital assets and highlights the need for broad cooperation. And I must say, to their credit, UNESCO insisted that the industry, the software industry, be involved right from the beginning in our discussions. I think that's one of the weaknesses I find with libraries and archives. We tend to speak to our own. We speak to our own conferences. We need to get out more to our related partners in their environment and in their fields to discuss what we believe in. So we had Microsoft and Google were major partners in this event around PERSIST, and they're still persisting with us. They're still there. So I think UNESCO recognized that memory institutions are fighting a losing battle in capturing and maintaining the electronic evidence of the activities of government and non-government, unless the means or the platform for conveying that information was moving more towards an open source one and not a proprietary one. And therefore that would allow for easier and more affordable changes to platforms if needed throughout the digital information lifecycle. So Persist had a conference or a meeting last December in The Hague, and we came up with some recommendations and a work plan, a roadmap for action. The leaders really come from UNESCO, but also from the Netherlands, from Canada, and to some extent from Europe. But anyone can really join in. And we hope to have further discussions around how this is going to work on an international stage during the IFLA conference, which takes place in Lyon, France, this August. So I've been volunteered to assume responsibility for the part of Persist that involves content issues. This area will address the different opinions that were expressed about what to preserve and who does what amongst all the memory institutions. But you know, I also take the point made several times here in the past 2 days that it's not only about the content and its storage, but almost more importantly, it's about the imperative we have as libraries to drive new connections to that content, in this case to government information, to encourage its use by various stakeholders to do that creative work that we saw this morning. When I was IFLA president, my theme was Libraries, a Force for Change. And so the content we hold and the connections we can make between content and users, I think is how we can make a difference in people's lives. And that's just what it's all about, and I've seen so many stories around that as I've visited libraries around the world, how that's happening, and it's really, really encouraging to see that. In addition to content, the other 2 key areas in Persist involve technical requirements, so there'll be a whole group of people looking at the technical side, and then there's the policy side, raising awareness among all stakeholders, including governments, and the industry about the importance of sustainable digital preservation and the need for cooperation. So I'm really optimistic, in spite of some of the failed projects in the past. I'm really optimistic that we can come up to some agreement, some way forward on a global level to ensure that objective that we've all been talking about. So when I think about the international level, I can't really say, you know, we should do a specific action item because it's so country specific. The 2 words that come to mind for me are collaboration and advocacy. Those are the 2 words in terms of what we can do at the international level. And there's no one organization or institution that can tackle this dilemma of the digital and the born digital government information. Collaboration will be key. Collaboration between research libraries globally, but also with other related stakeholders, other heritage organizations, foundations, industry players, the academic community, all those who can help support preservation and access efforts. And in that regard, I heard a very interesting expression recently that I think encapsulates what librarians do in this area. In a recent speech given in Asia by Canada's Governor General, the Right Honourable David Johnston, he talked about the diplomacy of knowledge. And among other things, he defined it as the ability and willingness to work together across disciplines and across borders, and to share the knowledge we uncover and refine, basically to improve the human condition. And that's what I think we're all about. So I find that as professionals in our research libraries, and this is true not just in North America, we are compartmentalized on campus. We need to identify the like-minded thinkers that exist in our world, and not just the usual suspects of the history professors or the literature professors, but also the data scientists and the computer scientists and Mathematicians, my worst subject in school. All faculty who are interested in exploring that innovation side of using data and to make it more available and more useful to our users. So there's a lot of examples of that, some excellent work being done in this area, as we heard, in the US and Canada and so on. And James Jacobs, too, pointed out in his report, some impressive collaborations are underway, including government, universities, and the private sector, to preserve the born digital government information. There are challenges to collaboration, yes, but let's not forget the benefits, really, which range from consortial cost benefits, I'm sure, to the strength of speaking with a single unified voice to influence decision makers. And I do see an important role here for CRL, which is, after all, an international consortium that acquires and preserves traditional and digital resources from a global network of sources. And given that much of this material comes from foreign sources, I think the expertise of CRL and its member libraries would bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to any international collaborative effort. And I'll just conclude with a few words about IFLA itself, which, as I hope you all know, and I hope you are all members, is the global voice for libraries. We have over 1,500 members from about 150 countries. And I think IFLA is poised to take a leadership role as well in terms of moving this conversation forward on the international stage. And that's one of the things. My second point is advocacy. That's something that IFLA does really well. IFLA has no power, really, no legislative or otherwise power, but it can work through its knowledge, its expertise of all the members. It persuades, and it's persistent to influence the decision makers. And that's what a lot of IFLA's work at that international level is about. It's going to international meetings, government, UN meetings, to advocate for libraries. Within IFLA, there's also a section on government information and official publications. IFLA's got 45 sections, and one of them deals specifically with government information. And that group, I think it would be a great vehicle to promote some of the ideas that have come up here and bring them up to the level of the international stage so that we can get more partners and advocates from other places. So perhaps CRL or its members could draft an advocacy statement or something that we could take to that international level about what we're trying to do with preserving born digital government information. And I know that IFLA would be very happy to accept a statement that could be promoted. The section is doing one thing in particular. It's also doing an advocacy statement on the importance of maintaining professional government information expertise in libraries. Not only the content. I know several, federal libraries have closed, and we always think, well, there'll be less accessibility to information, but we're also losing expert information managers as well, the librarians who work there. So I think it's a major issue and something that we're taking on at the international level. So some important steps have been taken, and there is progress, but there is really so much more to do. And I hope that you have been sort of influenced to participate not just at the state or national, but also the international level. I think it's so rewarding to see the benefits and the effects we can have on libraries, archives, and users around the world. The ideas of advocacy and collaboration, I think, is what I would promote as something that that should come out of this forum. We need passionate and dedicated partners in this. And so if I could just end positively, as was mentioned yesterday, I think by Matthew, we are all struggling with how to deal with digital big data in all its formats. But the technology is there, should be used creatively to achieve the objectives that we all aspire to. We should see it not as the Leviathan, the monster, but something that is much better and much more positive. So I would just end by saying, let's be ambitious, but also pragmatic. So thank you.